We have here an old JMI era VOX AC30 with integrated top boost. The owner thought it might be a 63. The serial number says October of 64. One of the pot dates I was able to get also is 1964. And it has the gray panel, all of which says the later half of 64 and all that fun stuff. It doesn't seem to have the original speakers, which would have been gray or silver. It has some blues, which seem to have been relatively recently well coned. I'll check them to see how well. It has all the original iron. I can't quite tell if it's Woden or Haddon or Albion. I'll have to consult my book for any telltales. It does have every tech's favorite, a add-on plug like this, with just the wire terminals inside with screws. This is fine as a temporary repair if you're on the road and you need to do this and duck into a hardware store. But we're going to get a molded plug cable to put on this for safety. It's got some not great solder joints here made to the dual 16 F&T multi-section can cap here. I've seen much worse, but I think a 64 deserves better, more careful work. Though in fairness, it is kind of difficult to get these solder joints neat on these. You have so many wires connecting. It can be done better. There's a splice on this primary, and it's just taped. I can't see how well they've done it, but I'll probably redo that just so I know it's good. And it's got all new resistors here except for these two grid stoppers. I'll be measuring all these, seeing if any of them need to be replaced. I'll probably replace all 8 of them, the screen grids and the grid stoppers. The screen grids are 100 ohm, half watts. They tend to fail, especially with current production tubes. The grid stoppers tend to drift. They've got some nice pyres here that were added in. I might be able to leave those and find some, if I have some pyre 1.5Ks, just make them all match. You can see here on this screen grid here, this is J-hooked to this bit of wire here. And it's something you often see in JMI era Voxes because the resistors need to span from here to here. And that's a really long span for current production resistors. I usually use a 2-watt metal film Vichy, which makes the span just because of the length of the leads, nothing to do with the tolerance or anything. It's got a 68 ohm, 10-watt cathode resistor here. Would have been 50 ohms originally, 82 in the very early ones. This is probably a pretty good choice. I'll check and confirm. It has a very generic bypass cap across it, though. We'll do better when we get to that. Over here, it has the original 22K going to the vibrato circuit. That's the filter node for the vibrato circuit. It's got a generic cap there. That'll get changed out. They didn't choose this relatively high wattage resistor because of the current, but just to make the span from here to here. You can't do that with a half-watt resistor, though half watt would be sufficient for the current present. Unless this thing measures way out of spec for 22K, it's going to remain. They rarely need to be changed out in these things. They're just so non-stressed by normal operation of these amps. In the last live stream, someone was saying that no one ever wax-potted transformers. Well, they were doing it in Britain at the time. This is some wax that's leaked out of this. It's very common. It was adhered to the slider board, but yeah, these transformers were wax potted, and as they get warm in operation, the wax leaks out over time. It rarely causes problems for the iron itself, but you usually do have nice little puddles and clusters of old beeswax on your slider board. So if you have one of these, mind your own beeswax. It's got the standard dual 8 microfarad F&T that most people use. I'm not a big fan of how it was attached, but it is there. Another generic one here for the top boost, 30 microfarad or 33 or 32, whatever that cap is. You can see it's not really held in place very well by that oversized clamp. We'll be bypassing the voltage selector switch and just hardwiring it for US voltage use because these things are unreliable. We'll leave the switch in place cosmetically and all that. And I'll make sure that the hot is fused before the switch, etc., bring this all up to code and give it a new ground connection for its AC safety ground, not bring that to that node there. You can see a whole lot of replaced resistors here with these 1 watt or 2 watt pyres. I think these are 1 watt. Very nice resistors, very not original to the amp, would have had half watt carbon composites. And these two resistors on the phase inverter output are non-original. The serial number of the amp stamped with a T, indicating that this was a treble model, but all the values that I see here are those of the normal. These are very nice WEMA caps here. They're just not original to the amp. The rest of the coupling caps in the amp are these very nice WEMA gold foils, trophy foils, and some Phillips mustards, and then some old dog legs throughout. But all these original electrolytics, these Hunts caps here, they need to be changed out. There's only a few of them in the amp. Relative to other amplifiers, it's pretty easy to do. But the amp will sound a lot better once those are out with some fresh new ones in place. You can see quite a few resistors have been changed out already. Mixture of carbon films. Well, Pyre is also a carbon film, so, but it looks like it was done at different times by different techs due to the way the solder work is different. And this solder is shiny, this solder is not. So I am certainly not the second tech to be in here. Has some things in here like where these two caps are in parallel with each other to make up a value. They're very nice Phillips mustards, but that's not original. I'll make sure that everything's good in that area. I don't like putting that much mechanical stress on these tags. You can see that the tag behind here is actually broken. That's very common on these for techs to break these tags while getting old components out. I will be sure not to do that myself, and I'll make sure that every place that has happened is properly reinforced. And places like this where this capacitor has been tack soldered on top, not going through the hole in the tag, they changed out the resistor beneath and they just tack soldered this back. It works, blah, blah, blah. But, a lot of techs assume that no one will ever see what they did. And so they just do something to get it off their bench. And I think when there is a chance to have a mechanical connection, you should do that. Same for here where they changed out this resistor and just tack soldered it to the bus wire there instead of wrapping it around partially. I'll clean all this up. And the input jacks are really noisy. I'll make sure they're clean. Sometimes the old resistors need to be changed out, but usually a good cleaning will take care of all that kind of mystery noise, though they are mechanically quite loose. A good bit of sloppy work in this area. I'll clean all that up as I go. Some of these tags have just been annihilated. I want to see what's underneath these and see how much I can clean that up. It hurts me to see so much damage in one of these when it's all avoidable if you just take your time. You just have to care. I need to see what our options are. This connection here has lost its set screw. These are screw-in terminals. I don't know whether I can find a screw that fits that or whether there's something on the market that would replace this block. This is where the 8-ohm wire, the green, is supposed to go, and this is where the blue is supposed to go. And this is where the connections to the speakers are made, either to 16 and ground or 8 and ground. In this case, 16 and ground. But to be able to test this amp out, I needed to use these two because this one is missing a screw. So I have flipped the green and the blue. So this is connected to the 8-ohm load for use with my 8-ohm cab. And then when I put everything back, I'll put this back. Replacing this is optional if the owner never uses it with anything other than the 16-ohm cab and the load of his cab. But it's a shame that someone lost that screw at some point in the past. In happy fun news, though, this chassis is remarkably clean. All the ground connections look pretty good. I'll clean them a bit more, but I'm not worried about corrosion so much as just making it perfect. And I've shown in previous JMIs how the different pieces of the chassis, as they fit together, can loosen over time, and all kinds of foul gunk can get in between them and prevent good grounds and bad connection. You won't have any good connections until you clean all that out. I'm not going to have to do any of that on this. This is all really nice. I'll probably loosen up a couple of the screws that hold the pieces of the chassis together and flush it out with ISO just to get out anything that might be there and then screw it back together. But it's not going to be some heroic undertaking as it has been in the past. All right, there's the thumbnail shot. All original input jack hardware, all original knobs. The panel is really in great shape. I really do like this gray panel. I know everyone wants the copper panel, but I think this is just great. My favorite look is the gray panel with the gray silver speakers and the black grill cloth, the black diamond. This one has the brown. That was the late 64 is the tail end of the brown, but it already has introduction of the gray panel. I have consulted my big book of JMI VOXes, OH114/DT indicates this might be an Albion. It's most likely an Albion power transformer, though Parmicos were most commonly used at the time this amp came out, but they used whatever they had. So that's Albion most likely, though there's nothing more specific than OH114DT. Unusually, it says Lamarck Electronics Limited, Haywards Heath. So this was rarely used during this period. It's usually used in the solid state amps and towards the very end of JMI, but this is the Lamarck output transformer. So that's very strange to see. We'll see how it sounds. And I do not know who made the choke. There are no codes or labels remaining on the choke. They were all made to the same spec. This could be a Parmico, Albion, Haddon, Woden, or maybe another Lamarck. It seems to be working. I have tested the amp. The amp does not sound phenomenal, but it does not have any major issues. It's just not very great yet. Speaking of such things, all the preamp tubes are wonderful. These are all RCA 7025s. Got a Brimar 12AX7, and I don't remember the brand of 12AU there, but it's RCA or equivalent. So this is all old stuff here. It's got some Mesa branded EL84s, which are of varying degrees of discoloration. These two have less discoloration. These two have more discoloration. These two tubes have been running hotter than these tubes. So I don't know if it's poorly matched sets of tubes or whether it's the resistors have drifted. I'll get there. But they seem to be working okay without a lot of hum in the output. It's got a Pisvane GZ34. These tend not to be very good, the Pisvane labeled tubes. If it works, it works. Fingers crossed. I'm not going to borrow trouble, but I would not be surprised if we have to put a better rectifier tube in there. But it is very, very nice to see that this thing is not just pitted in rust and covered in dirt and grime and grease of all the decades. This has been cleaned. This has been kept clean. It's got little bitty rust spots, nothing big. I will give it a very, very minor wipe as I go with just the tiniest little bit of WD-40. And I'll just work that around and let that get in there. And I'll wipe up the excess, and this thing will be just beautiful. WD-40, in this case, just on steel like this, does no harm, really cleans well, and leaves a light surface film so that rust is unlikely to ever want to make a home there. Then after a while, I can just wipe up the excess, see what I got on the towel. I have a very nice amp with no elbow grease involved. So this thing's going to be gorgeous by the time it goes home, and it's going to sound it as well. But I've got some work to do. I've got to go through the entire thing and measure resistors, see what's in spec and out of spec, and take notes and all that, and get a parts list together. You know, if the owner really only wants me to do the bare minimum, that's fine. But I think that's what's happened with this amp over the years with different techs. Each tech's just done the bare minimum needed at any given point. And so we end up with this kind of mongrelized amp. And I'd like to go in there and make everything right if I'm allowed. So stay tuned and find out. And thanks for watching.